What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, super pleased this time, as I am always, to be joined by Salman Ali. He covers the Houston Rockets for ESPN 97.5, and he is also the host of the Red Nation Hoops podcast. Follow him on Twitter at SalmanAliNBA. As you can tell, we're probably going to talk some Rockets right now because I don't know if anyone's been paying attention, but they've been super boring this season, and we haven't talked about them at all, and I figured it was just long overdue to have Salman back on for clearly the first time in at least, 2 years, I guess, at this point, to talk about Houston. So how are you doing today, Salman?
I'm doing all right. I think I still cover an NBA team. I don't know. Has the NBA considered relegation? Has the NBA really put some thought behind that? Because it'd be a nice time to just look around the league. I feel like there are some candidates for that right now.
I would be curious to know how many podcasts you and I specifically have recorded about the Rockets since, let's say since everything shut down March, or let's say since the end of last season. I think I might set the over-under at 7 right now because of everything that was just going on. This team never fails in the Tillman Fertitta era specifically. It feels like it never fails to break news, and it always feels like it might be the wrong kind of news. You think it's, maybe they'll start selling on their own terms, then PJ Tucker leaves the team. So what has it been like? What is just what has it been like covering this team where everything feels just so transient?
Well, for me, it's you expected this to be a little bumpy, but it feels like every possible, area where it could be bumpy, it was like the maximum level of bumpy. We go into training camp. Obviously, it's gonna be a little awkward between James and the Rockets, right? But for James to just not show up at training camp and then to find out, oh, not only is he not at training camp, he's actually in Atlanta, in Las Vegas, and just partying without a mask. And it's like and this PJ Tucker thing, this did not have to be this messy. This could have been just PJ Tucker plays out his contract until the trade deadline. The Rockets find a new home for him. Bam, we're done. That's it. It could be just that easy, but every single step of the way, it's been maximum levels of messiness.
Yeah, and before we even get into the trade stuff, which I'm sure is what on a national level I'm sure fans really want to hear, do you look at this team and see anyone that I think there are two obvious answers, but is there anyone that intrigues you long term for this team that you look at and say there's a reason to watch this player on the Rockets right now because he will still be or should still be on the Rockets next season or even beyond next season? Because that's what this team lacks, and you and I were talking about it before the podcast, is I think even Rockets fans, you said, might not want to tune in for every game or at least pay that much attention because how attached are you going to get to these players, or how much are you going to take away from a team that feels like it's just going to overhaul itself in a couple weeks?
Right, and I think the diehard fans are still watching every game, but as you said, there's really only two players to really watch right now, and that's obviously Christian Wood, and he's injured, so you can't really watch that.
They can't win without Christian Wood, though. That's a fact that's been proven now.
Yeah, it's the Christian Wood is definitely the only problem on this team. It is and Kevin Porter Jr., who just came up from the G League, which just shows how dire it is. That fans have got themselves so excited to see Kevin Porter Jr. Not to say that he hasn't been impressive in the G League and his NBA debut. Obviously, he's definitely turned some heads, but we're talking about a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old who, aren't cornerstone pieces on a championship team right now, or at least haven't shown themselves to be that. So, yeah, it's pretty ugly. And I think right now, as someone covering the team, I have shifted my attention to covering the broad strokes, right? The trade deadline, free agency, draft, lottery. I think that's where your average Rockets fan is paying attention. Just recently, we did a trade deadline podcast for Red Nation Hoops, and that's probably going to get a bunch of downloads. And that's because Rockets fans are really tuned into the transactional game right now, and I think that's probably the right move. If I were a fan, I'd pay attention to that stuff too, because the on-court product is not pretty.
Yeah, it's amazing how you slap trades on anything and it feels like it does numbers. And this season, I love the transactional game. I do think it's, there's a lot of media writers, bloggers and I among them, that complains that there's focus taken away. It's too much on the transaction game, and there's all this surface level analysis on TV. which I all completely agree with. But even in a season like this, where I feel like there's the Rockets are the only let's say there's sub three teams right now that you look at and say, okay, you know what, they're gonna really overturn the roster by the trade deadlines. Like the transactional game post James Harden really shouldn't be taking center stage to that extent, and yet you put trades on anything still when there's nothing going on. And even someone like myself who loves trades, it's tough to talk about them, to write about them this year because there's so few scenarios going on where it's, hey, let's look at what moves contenders could make. And then I find that I'm just like coming up with all these hypothetical Rockets players trades because like that's just how stagnant it feels like the trade market might be. And maybe more stuff will materialize as we get closer. Teams can make different decisions. Trades always catch us off guard as well. But it's still amazing that the transaction game hits so hard as it does.
Yeah, and as you're painting that picture about that fan who hates talking about the transactions and hates the surface level analysis on TV, I just found myself relating so much because that is me. Like, especially covering a contender, I feel like so many people pay attention to these marginal moves at the deadline, where sometimes they matter, but most of the time they're just marginal moves. They help you 1, maybe 2% on the margins, and you can get better at the trade deadline. It's not. Don't get me wrong. That's definitely possible. We've seen general managers really overhaul their teams at the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Daryl Morey is an example of that, right? Former Rockets GM. But I feel like for teams like this, right, like teams that aren't in the contendership conversation, are far from it. This is where it gets interesting because every transaction they make is actually magnified because all the assets that they get back are super important towards their cause in rebuilding. Whereas every transaction a contender makes, those assets that they're giving away really aren't worth much to them. They don't care, and I think that's why I think there's going to be a lot of focus on this stuff. And I think, I think it's justified. Like I would not blame I will not blame anyone for tuning into only the transactions.
Yeah, and look, even if it's a contender, I'm going to get lost in the whirlwind like the week leading up to it. But this season specifically, where it's like and the Rockets are different because there's been something happening every day. But it's even, when we do mailbags on this podcast and we get so many questions and we do one in, this season, let's say we did one in the post James Harden trade or something, and there's not really a lot of rumors in the ether, we still get so many questions about trades. It's just amazing how fascinated people are. And I don't know if that's, I wouldn't say it's I don't know if I could say it's damaging to the game. Maybe there's too much of a focus on it, but for the Rockets specifically, you have to focus on it. Like that's just been even before the James Harden trade, even before the Russell Westbrook trade. Just when you sort of sense the undercurrent of this team might be coming apart at the seams, that's been the sole focus. And so let's dive into it and let's throw it here. Are they going to find a trade for PJ Tucker, or is this a teams try and push them to the edge, and is this a potential buyout situation?
Oh, I think a PJ Tucker trade was going to happen as far back as like 2 months ago. I mean, as soon as James Harden was dealt, PJ Tucker was going to follow suit. It was just a matter of when, not if. And I think there are going to be teams that are interested in trading for him. I don't think it's going to result in a buyout. I think his market value is probably less than what the Rockets are asking for, but they could. What we're really looking at is if you're a contender trading for PJ Tucker, you are probably bargain hunting, right? You are not trading for the premium assets on the market, but you can find someone here in PJ Tucker where you can snag for like 2 second-round picks, which really isn't much considering you can buy into second-round picks every year, right? So I think that's kind of the price you're looking at for PJ Tucker. Perhaps an expiring contract. Who knows? Well, what's really interesting is the stuff that they could do alongside PJ Tucker, right? Like if the Rockets really wanted to shake stuff up, they could combine PJ Tucker's contract with other contracts on the roster. Perhaps, Eric Gordon was a candidate before he got hurt, right?
Right.
Eric Gordon, if you combined PJ Tucker and Eric Gordon, you could get back a serious player, right? For your long-term rebuilding plan. I don't think they can do that anymore. But that was where I was really starting to pay attention to. Now I think you're probably going to get more of a conventional trade deadline. You're probably going to get your 2 second-round picks back for PJ Tucker, or maybe 1 in a protected second. Who knows?
Yeah, their ask of a young, and there's been reports of asks all over the place. First, it was they wanted 3 seconds. or a young player. I saw something that said they just want someone who could play for them now, but it seems like the common denominator has been they want a young player, and I just don't see them getting at least not a good young player for PJ Tucker at age 35. And given the way he's played, he's not helped his trade value with, the defense just doesn't feel the same, and then the shooting on wide open threes this year has been pretty abysmal for him by his standards.
It's funny. One aspect, everything's changed for the Rockets, but one aspect that hasn't changed is the sorry, excuse me, is the posturing. That hasn't changed.
Right.
Like everything, the front office has changed, the coaching staff has changed, the players have changed, but the posturing still exists. And it's funny, it's existed all season. Going back to the James Harden trade, they were asking for a blue chip prospect. They never got it back. They were asking for a treasure trove of picks. They did get that back, but they consistently continue to posture in the media. And I think they understand that they're probably not going to get what they're asking for in the media, but I think this is just part of the game. And it's going to be interesting to see if they do other stuff around the margins, because I think PJ Tucker mentally, I've already just shipped him out of Houston. I think he's probably already going to like there are probably already 3 or 4 teams. I mean, it's already been reported. There are already teams that are in serious conversations for Tucker, but I think the players on the margins, your Sterling Browns, your David Nwabas, I think it's going to be interesting to see if those kinds of players are also, dealt at the deadline. And what it's going to be a fire sale, but it's really how broad is the fire sale going to get? How much of their current roster is going to turn over? I think that's what's going to be interesting about this trade deadline.
I'm wondering too if, because the teams that have been predominantly interested in Tucker, you look at them and it's most of them, it's really tough to find like salary matching. So in most cases looking at, okay, you're gonna have to take 2 contracts back, which when they're expiring is fine, but it creates a bit of a roster crunch. But then that could necessitate other moves on the margins. And I think Sterling Brown was a name that interests me. Just someone who's shot fairly well from 3 and been defending all different sorts of players this year. And a team like I identified as like the Clippers, like if you can get him for a 2nd round pick and you're gonna have to send out commensurate salary at that point, I think they have super small deals. Like that feels like one of, as you already mentioned, one of the under radar names that could actually help a contender, where I'm not sure Nwaba would be in everyone's rotation because of the shooting. How much can he stay on the floor? But if Brown's going to shoot like he has for most of the season from deep, he feels like someone that could actually nudge the needle in the right direction for a good team that maybe has finite spots already in its rotation.
Yeah, and considering that you got him for free basically in free agency, right? You only paid for his contract. That's a good deal of business for Houston, just to get an asset back for a minimum salary player. And that's a consistent trend with their entire roster. They were gearing up before the season for a title chase, right? And a lot of these players, because of that, are on bargain basement deals, right? Danuel House is another example of that. Great contract, getting paid dirt cheap, not having the best season, right? But I could easily see a team deciding, we think there's more here. We've seen Danuel House be a playoff player before, so I could see players like that getting dealt as well, right? Like, because if you're a contender that's going bargain basement shopping, right? Like the Rockets are for sale right now. I mean, you look at their roster, so many of these players are making almost nothing, right? There's the only bad contract on the books right now is probably John Wall. Everyone else is making a reasonable sum of money. Even Victor Oladipo, expiring contract, right? So it's one of those things where like Houston has gotten calls on pretty much every single one of these players, and it's a matter of how broad do they want to make this sale. I think there are going to be players on this team that are moved that Rockets fans weren't expecting to get moved, and it's one of those things where this is truly a tear down, and I think it's going to be really interesting, but we'll see.
So excuse me. I'm coughing now too. It's apparently infectious, and we're recording over a computer. So how's that happening? But yeah. So let's try and go through some of these names, and I'm going to ask you whether you think they're going to still be with the Rockets, whether they'll get dealt or won't get dealt past the trade deadline, and maybe we can get into what ass would be there. So PJ Tucker, we've already covered. We both agree that he's just gone, right?
Yeah.
Sterling Brown.
I'll say no right now. I think I think there's a possibility, but I'll say for right now, I think they keep him.
And so you don't think a second round pick then would be enough to just get that done? Like if a contender comes in with a second round pick in the future?
Well, I don't know how many teams are going to come in like that. We'll see. It would not surprise me if he gets dealt. I get the feeling that he's not going to command a second round pick, and if he does, I think it'd probably be protected.
Yeah, the idea, like I was thinking, like a team like the Clippers with, they could come in with Fiondu Kabengele, where the salaries basically line up, and then a 2023 second round pick, which comes via Portland. Is that
Yeah,
a deal
and
that you do?
that's the type of team that you profile that'd be perfect, right? Because they are out a lot of first round picks, and they could definitely go bargain basement shopping. Another team, the Brooklyn Nets, I think are going to be. I think there's going to be a deal here. Specifically, I think PJ Tucker is a great target for them because again, you're out of first round
Hmm.
picks until 2028, I think, and I think PJ Tucker can be got for second round picks, as we said. And they need defense. They need rotational players that can play at the end of big games. And I think PJ Tucker is definitely, a perfect fit for them. And he's played alongside James Harden before. There's a connection there. I think Mike D'Antoni, obviously assistant coach in Brooklyn, coming coach PJ Tucker. Obviously a connection there. So it'd be a natural fit there. I think PJ Tucker in Brooklyn is something I'd watch for.
The thing with that is, so he makes, what is it, 7 and change this season? He's at 7.9, around just about 8. Yeah, he's at 8 million. They, like, you have to take Spencer Dinwiddie back in that
Yeah.
deal, which I guess Houston wouldn't care about, but I'm wondering if I'm Brooklyn, I might prefer to have the bird rights on Spencer Dinwiddie just because he's younger and what he does. Obviously, he's excessive there. I'd be wondering, is that a situation where you can, because Spencer Dinwiddie also makes more money, like, is that a PJ Tucker and, like, Danuel House situation that they could justify doing?
Wouldn't surprise me. And if that's the case, I think you probably get, maybe a third second round pick out of it. And here's the thing with Daniel House. The reason I am skeptical that they will get a deal done for Daniel House is because his value is just at rock bottom right now. I don't think this is the type of front office that likes selling.
Hmm.
Uh, when their players are at rock bottom price value. We'll see. But combining contracts like that could be a clever way to kind of for Brooklyn to retain the bird rights of Dinwiddie and also get that deal done for Tucker and get two players that can actually help you for a long playoff run. I think both those guys would be rotation players for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think, look, it really depends on what Houston would think of Dinwiddie because you need his bird rights to be an asset or a third team. Like the team I've always come back to is just Orlando because we know we've been interested in them in the past. They won't have cap space and they always seem like they want to live in the middle. But the Nets do have Atlanta's second round pick this year, which isn't necessarily going to be terrible. They have a reverse protected Indiana pick in the second round this year, which is it conveys if it's in the top 15 of the second round as opposed to the bottom 15 where it wouldn't. And then they have Golden State's 2025 second round pick, which if you want to short Golden State's future at this point and you're a different team, like that's totally fine. They even have a Phoenix second round pick this year, but that's not going to convey. So something like Spencer Dinwiddie, the Atlanta second rounder, and the Golden State second rounder for PJ Tucker and Danuel House. That seems like it might be a justifiable deal for both sides.
Yeah, that sounds like a logical deal.
Which is wild to say about Spencer Dinwiddie, by the way, just because it's like the trading him with an injury is just so difficult, but he has a player option anyway, and so he could just leave for nothing is how you have to view it. But he was a fringe all-star, and then all of a sudden you're trading him for Danuel House and PJ Tucker. This is just like a whirlwind of a year. I guess, look, Danuel House would be the next logical place to start. Then you said you're skeptical they get a deal done because specifically he just hasn't shot the ball that well this year.
Right.
But we've
Yeah.
seen like they've toyed in the past. Like he's even guarded some fives for them. So like he has real defensive portability for you. And with that second year left on his deal, if I'm a contender, like I'm trying to get him just as a bigger wing defender, and then you bank on hopefully the jump shot just ends up panning out because we've seen him hit higher clips for longer stretches before. And so, but your guess would be that he's still in Houston.
My guess is, especially because there's years remaining on that contract, you can trade him next year if you really want to, and I think you can probably get better value back. My guess is that he probably remains, but if they combine contracts with PJ Tucker like that, it would not surprise me if he does get shipped out. But I'm probably more likely to believe that he gets shipped out than Sterling Brown. I'll say that.
That's interesting. I'd be so curious to see what he just goes for on his own because he's cheap, but he has that second year, and so it's like, do you maybe get one of the prospects that was drafted at the end of the last round of the 2020 draft, and then a second with that, like because that's probably a good enough haul, I would think. Where it's I don't even know. I'm trying to think of who was drafted at the end. The Jazz could come in with, Udoka Azubuike and then a second round pick, and it's like, okay, well, we still have the cachet of Azubuike was drafted number 27 overall, and the Jazz do need. The Rockets do have room on their front line, especially if they end up trading PJ Tucker eventually. So I would just be curious on his own what he would net, because I do agree that if you combined him with PJ Tucker, like that's how maybe you up the return a little bit. But on his own, I would be fascinated to see what he commands.
Yeah, and if I could make a quick addendum, I changed my mind. I think Sterling Brown's going to get traded. I think because you're not going to get an opportunity back to trade him. Like you will get another opportunity to trade Danuel House. I think Sterling Brown. It just makes a lot of sense for a team to just, as you said, like the Clippers would be a nice spot, right? And I think Sterling Brown gets traded. Yeah.
That would be my prediction for him as well. I don't think Danuel House is going to get traded. I think he should. But because I think just having a season, let's go a season and a half, a season and a quarter of Danuel House, like there's a little bit extra value I think that you could glean. Whereas if you move him over the offseason or in the middle of next season, like you're probably getting a not so sexy second round pick, and that's it.
Right.
Um Ben McLemore, sorry. I was trying to scroll over my fingers. What ends up happening with him? Do you think he's still with Houston or no?
No, I think he gets traded too. I mean, again, like a lot of these guys are vet guys who would probably help a playoff contender, and you can get them for fairly cheap. I don't think Ben McLemore is going to demand a first round pick by any means.
No.
And if you're Houston, like you just want as many bites at the apple as you can, even if they're second round picks. Second round picks are cheap contracts down the road for fairly good players that we've seen. Like Brooklyn has done a really good job at taking advantage of second round picks in the draft, and I think Houston, you have a very limited young player pool. Right now, it's pretty much Kevin Porter Jr. and like Christian Wood and Jae'Sean Tate. Like that's it. You need to refill these coffers. So I think second round picks could be valuable for them.
I just don't know who's going to give up anything for Ben McLemore at this point. He's shooting over his past 20 games. He's shooting 23.5% from three, and so it could be a bad second, I guess. I'm just trying to figure out the team that would, because he's shooting in theory, I guess. But if you're worried about how his season has unfolded, I don't know what you necessarily give up for him.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like you're banking on what you saw from him last season, right? Where he fit in that Gerald Green role for Houston like a glove, right? He was just a spot up shooter for Houston off the bench. They weren't depending on him for defense. He's probably not going to play much in the playoffs. If you're trading for him, you're probably trading for him for a regular season stretch run. You could see a lot of these 8 seed teams or like a team trying to make a play-in tournament try trading for Ben McLemore, because usually those teams aren't really eyeing defense as a priority, right? So that could be a nice landing spot for him. A team that's just on the edges of the playoffs or right there. Because again, like he can contribute. I think he can just be a nice spot up shooter that can play 15 to 20 minutes a game for you and knock down like 3 3-pointers.
Eric Gordon. So he's injured, and I think I actually wrote about how I thought he would be an interesting trade candidate. There's people probably overanalyze his 3-point clip this year, but he also takes them from a distance far enough where that's just going to help. And then he's been absurd inside the arc this year, 60.2% on drives. So do you think there's still a chance that a team might take a gamble on him, knowing that, well, he's supposed to come back in 4 to 6 weeks, or is that completely out of the question? Or let's say, if you can just get off of his money right now, is that something that Houston's even willing to do? Because I doubt, particularly while he's injured, that there's going to be a team that's going to also give you value for Gordon, because that was probably an iffy proposition to begin with.
I actually don't think his contract is that bad, because if you look at the incentives on the deal, it's like okay, so he has to make an all-star team, or you have to win the championship if for that last year to get guaranteed. And that's not like, if any of those things happen, you're really happy with the contract at that point, right? You're more than happy paying it. And really, you're looking at, like, after this season, 2 more seasons for Eric Gordon. So, and if you look at the value, it's really not that bad. I think if they traded him this year, they actually might have gotten pretty decent value for him. But I think the injury complicates it. I think as of this moment, I don't think he's going to be traded anymore. If you asked me this question literally a week ago, I think he would have gotten traded. Because he would have been the surprise player. I don't think a lot of people would have expected Eric Gordon to be on the market, but I think he definitely is off the market now, because I don't think Houston wants to capitalize on this, like, trading him at his lowest moment.
Yeah, I will say, even when he was playing well, 2 years and $37.8 million for him in the 2 years coming, and obviously we can throw out basically the third year just because, as you said, those incentives. It still felt steep for him. Just looking at his injury history, how his 3-point percentage has dipped over the past few years, but mostly the injury stuff for me.
But he's just a guy you can play in crunch time moments and you feel comfortable on both ends of the floor, right? Like, he is going to be a positive defender for you in playoff games. Like, we've seen that from Eric Gordon, excuse me. And he will help you spacing the floor. Even if he's not shooting the ball at a high clip, teams still defend him out there, which is crazy, but they do. And I think that's the kind of player where, like, you don't mind having him for the next 2 or 3 seasons. I think he would help a lot of teams deepen their guard rotation. The problem is, again, the injury, and I don't think a lot of teams. I think at this moment, a team would rather trade for Oladipo than him.
The other problem is, too, when you're looking at the actual contenders, there's just so few of them have, like, the mid-end to, like, in an Eric Gordon trade, there's very few contenders that can do it with 1 or 2 contracts. It would be all these 3-for-1 scenarios, and those are really tricky to pull off in the middle of the year. And then obviously can be 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 if they're a contender is going to give up a key player. Where, like, let's use the Lakers as an example. Like, if they wanted to use Dennis Schroeder's expiring salary as the anchor in that deal, and part of the return is, Houston is, like, the books are just getting cleared after this season, or maybe they like Dennis Schroeder, who knows, whatever. There's other stuff attached, but then it's like, well, Dennis Schroeder is actually really important to what they're doing right now. And so as you go down that list, it just gets really hard to find teams that can cobble something together, especially when so many of them are hard capped this year and just working with finite resources to find a deal that's workable mid-season, where it feels like a lot of these destinations might make more sense over the offseason when everyone has more roster flexibility.
I think an off-season Eric Gordon trade definitely makes more sense, but again, like, I think he is a long-term hold kind of player. Like, he will help you for the years to come, right? I don't think he's one of those players where, like, you trade him for the stretch run and that's it. He can help you for the next coming years. I think he's a good enough player where, like, I don't think the numbers are that bad. I mean, you may have a different opinion on this. I actually think it's not a matter of if Eric Gordon gets traded, it's a matter of when. He's probably not going to get traded at this deadline, but I think, the coming off season or the following deadline, I would definitely keep my eyes out for Eric Gordon trades.
I would have probably still said no before his injury, but now I'm just like I would be shocked if he was moved because of his injury. Just, I don't even know, 4 to 6 weeks, what does that turn into? And then it's like the phrasing was moderate groin strain, which was just weird. And so, yeah, you're acquiring him for long term, but if you're a contender, you do have to worry about now. So I definitely agree that if anything happens, it'll probably be over the offseason. The name that I think gets bandied about the most on this team is Victor Oladipo, and I think they would be they would be foolish not to move him by the trade deadline.
So here's my question for you. What is Victor Oladipo's value right now?
I'm sorry. This is my podcast, and that was my question for you.
Yeah, because I actually don't think he has much of a market because he shot the ball so poorly, and ever since he got hurt, like, have you seen a really impressive stretch of Victor Oladipo games? Like, maybe you could say at the beginning of this season with Indiana,
yeah.
Right? But ever since, like, he has not had a long, consistent stretch of, like, really impressive games to where you feel comfortable trading for him, and not only comfortable trading for him, comfortable that he will fit into a new role, because he is definitely not going to shoot 20 shots a game on his new team if he gets traded. And if I'm Houston, like, first of all, it's really hard to construct deals for $20 million players, right? And second of all, you're probably going to have to take back deals that extend beyond this season because you're probably trading for a bad contract, right? At this moment, because of his value, if you're trading Victor Oladipo, you're probably going to have to pay for the following seasons, in addition to maybe a draft pick. And if I'm Houston, the calculation I do is like, would I rather have that space or would I rather have that draft pick? I would rather have that space. Honestly, they haven't had space in a long time to play with. A $20 million is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, look at what they did with the Christian Wood, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they can get really creative with that kind of space. And for a rebuilding team, like you don't want cumbersome contracts bogging down your books. You just don't. I think this is closer to a toss-up at the deadline than most people think.
The other thing, and this doesn't, it could matter to them, though, if they're, like, maybe they consider re-signing him anyway, if he's just coming back for the best dollar available. Do they view it at all as, well, we could have had Karis LeVert and our 2023 second-round pick, I think it was, and now we're going to end up with nothing. We're just going to end up with cap space instead. And I think you can objectively say that Karis LeVert is we haven't seen him play since they found the mass on his tumor, and I think he's coming back. We're recording this on a Saturday. It won't go live until a Monday, so he's coming back, I think, the night that we're recording this. But Karis LeVert, taking him on seems like it would have been the better decision right now.
But I think this is kind of why I think that there's a possibility that they just let his contract expire. Because why would they not just take on LeVert? Like when you look at that trade in the moment, like what was your initial reasoning as to why they didn't just take back LeVert? Because like I thought like LeVert was probably like as good or possibly even a better player than Oladipo even at that moment. So the only reason I could concoct was like, okay, so they see that as a malleable contract, right? They think that they can get space back in free agency, or that they can get him back to a reasonable deal. And I don't think they're going to get him back for a reasonable deal. It seems like Oladipo wants a lot of money, and he's probably going to get that because there's a lot of space out there, and you just never know with free agency. Like look at what Gordon Hayward got paid this summer, right? Like I've given up on predicting contracts like this, and if I'm Houston, like I think that's probably why they didn't do it. I think they probably did this trade for the space.
My gut reaction was that they thought, because I do think a peak Victor Oladipo has a higher apex than Karis LeVert.
Sure.
I thought that maybe they were bargaining that they could get more than Karis LeVert and a second for Victor Oladipo at the trade deadline, which, if that was the thinking, imploded. That blew up in their faces.
Well, as you mentioned, we've done like 7 podcasts this year, right? Like, and a lot of these podcasts have been speculating what the Rockets were going to get back for James Harden, right? And I believe we talked a lot about Brooklyn as a possible landing space. And what I kept saying throughout those podcasts is that deal was never going to be about the players that come back in the deal. Rockets fans that were panicking about the players coming back on that deal really need to focus on the draft picks, because that is where that is the only incentive for Houston to get a deal done with Brooklyn, right? They thought they can get a king's ransom from Brooklyn back on a deal, and they did. And I think when you analyze the James Harden trade, you really have to pay attention to the picks, because it was never going to be about the players. Even if you got LeVert back, like LeVert was going to be at the most an extra pick down the line, right? I think I don't think he was going to be a part of their long-term future, and I think it's probably more reasonable to view this as like, okay, they wanted to clear space and they wanted draft picks.
Yeah, it's tough. I could understand a fan's perspective because you would like to see your team have something tangible in return, and the best value that's going to come from this Brooklyn trade is so far off too. It's going to be on those later picks and swaps, and so now if you let Victor Oladipo walk for nothing, you just don't have anything. They didn't even take on Jared Allen. Like they just opted basically like, we're not going to take any players if they get old. And I'm not saying that was necessarily the wrong approach. We have to wait and see this bear out for the next 6-7 years, and even longer than that when you're looking at those picks turning into actual players and seeing how those players' careers pan out. Still, I can understand why that's tough to grapple. I'm just curious if so are you at the point where, like, if teams just threw expiring contracts still, where you're still going to get that money and they're attached to seconds, or the one that I've thought about, and I've been like scared to say it because I don't want to get destroyed, is like, what if the Lakers just decided to step ladder it with expiring contracts and gave you Talon Horton Tucker, who's also an expiring contract himself? Like, is that a deal that you just do at this point?
If Houston really wants that space, yeah, I guess. I mean, like, I really do think that if they get a deal done, I think the reason they traded for Oladipo was they wanted the flexibility of having that cap space. So I think if they were to get a trade done with Oladipo, I think they probably want expirings back. That's my best guess, right? Like, I could be wrong on this. They could trade back for a really bad, awful contract and a first round pick. Who knows, right? But my suspicion is that they want expirings back. So if they can get an asset back along with expirings, yeah, maybe. My question is, like, do the Lakers really value Oladipo's bird rights like that? Because you are essentially, in addition to trading for him to help you in the stretch run, you are also trading for his bird rights and the right to re-sign him. I'm not sure a team like the Lakers wants to pay Oladipo what he's going to get this summer.
I mean, when you watch the minutes they play without LeBron James, you could probably pretty easily talk yourself into Victor Oladipo.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, maybe. I guess the logic in that is, like, we view him as a long-term core piece that, along with just being someone who can help us in the stretch run, and maybe teams view him like that. I as of this moment, because of how poorly he's played, I'd be hesitant to view him like that. Because I just don't. I'm not sure how he can fit into a different role when he's so used to taking this many shots. Like, he is literally tanking possessions for Houston. Like, it is insane. Like,
he was doing that for the Pacers in the bubble too. It felt like.
Yeah, it is. He's just chucking, and credit to him. Like, there is a part of me that finds this hilarious, right? Like, he's just taking every opportunity he can to show that he's worth whatever contract he's going to get this summer, and the poor guy just can't hit a shot. He cannot, especially his 3-pointers, which he's always been pretty good at those, and he just can't hit them this season. It's very strange. And if I were a team, I'd be very, alarmed by that. But again, like, I still think it's a coin flip. Like, if you were asked me, like, do I think Oladipo gets traded? I don't know. I probably would assume that because they traded for him instead of Caris LeVert, that he probably doesn't, and I have a hard time finding his market. But at the same time, I could easily see a team selling themselves on Oladipo. My question is, what team is that going to be? Because, like, I was actually looking at a team like Boston, and the question, what I kept running into is, like, what minutes is he going to take away from, right? Like, because when Marcus Smart comes back, like, where is he going to play in the rotation there? Miami is another logical option, but, like, again, you're playing at that point. If you're Miami, you're playing really small, right? Your lineup is going to be like what? Jimmy Butler at power forward,
right?
Like it's tough. It's tough to find a logical landing spot for him. So I would probably say, gun to my head, I don't think a Victor Oladipo deal gets done. But
and you don't think he's back with Houston next season?
Yeah.
I guess I guess if you don't want to have the money on your books, then that's the smart scenario for them. I would just see then, is there, like, will teams give us expiring with something, anything, a second round pick, just to let him walk after what you gave up essentially to get him, or at least what you could have had in LeVert? It's just mind melting to me.
Again, like, this is not me. This is not saying this is what I would do, right? This is just me trying to find their logic from taking back Oladipo over LeVert and tracing it back to present day, right? Like, this is just me, putting the puzzle pieces together and assuming that's what they're thinking. I don't know if I would do that. I might be someone who just take back bad years on a contract and try to get a first round pick. But if they really like that space enough to where they took LeVert over him, it follows logically that they might continue that thinking into March 25th.
If that was their thinking, there's got to be like the Mavericks have to be willing to do James Johnson and then, like, Josh Green or Tyrell Terry for him, and those are both cheap players who will be intriguing to monitor the next couple of years. And you haven't added anything to your long-term payroll, but you've at least gotten someone for the for housing Oladipo, for leasing, letting him lease space, like, on your cap. I don't even know how to phrase that. I can't. I don't necessarily disagree with you that that's what they're going to do. I just can't talk myself into that being a good piece of business for the team. And the the thing here is Oladipo's going to be an unrestricted free agent, so Houston could want to keep him. He already turned down an extension, but that was kind of fait accompli from the beginning. He could go wherever he wants, and so I don't know what a team is gonna. Maybe they really like Oladipo and are willing to pay Oladipo, but he just still goes and signs in Miami anyway.
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's I don't think Houston intends to give him the contract he wants this summer. I just like why? Like why? If they do that, they are just openly telling the world that we are not a good front office anymore.
Right.
Like it makes no sense. He doesn't fit into their timeline. You don't want that type of money on your books. So the only other option is just let him walk. And letting him walk, it seems like a really stupid thing to do, right? But if you look at the guys that have graduated from the Rockets front office, they do that a lot. Like Daryl Morey let Chandler Parsons walk. Monty McNair at the Kings, he let not Buddy Hield. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Who am I thinking of?
Bogdanovich.
Bogdanovich walk, right? And a lot of people criticized him at the time. And like this is just something that they do. Like they really value the flexibility in cap room. And they when they're in rebuilding mode specifically, like the way they look at dollars and cents is like we only want to spend big money is it if that is a franchise cornerstone type of player. Like even Christian Wood they didn't give that type of money to, right? Like they seem to kind of look at players like if they aren't a cornerstone piece, we aren't giving them that cornerstone money. And Oladipo, I don't view in 2021 as a cornerstone piece. So my assumption is they don't want to give him cornerstone money.
Which I that part of it makes sense. Which I just don't understand why you acquire him then in the first place. The cap space to me isn't that important because I don't know who's going to want to go there. And I also just you look at salaries now around the league. Unless you're going to take back a Westbrook or a Wall, who you already have, these contracts are so short that that whole salary dumping game, yeah, it might exist, but are you going to get a first round pick for taking on Dwight Powell over the summer? And if you are, you didn't need all the cap space in the world to do that anyway because he's making $12 million or whatever it is.
Well, maybe they don't even see themselves as a place to salary dump, right? Maybe they just maybe they just want to use the space, right? Like, which is like, I agree. Like, who are you going to spend money on? I don't know, but like this, I just, from studying this front office over the last 10 years, they really like when they're in rebuilding mode, right? Like when they're a contender, they seem to spend money. I'm as in like they tend to give up, worse contracts, right? Like I'm not saying they go crazy when they're contender, right? Like, that's obviously not the case. But we've seen them give out bad contracts as contenders, right? Like Ryan Anderson, right, is a great example of that. Like they just gave him $80 million over 4 years. Eric Gordon, right? Another good example of that. Did they gave him a huge sum of cash over the past 6 seasons, right? It is one of those things where like once they get to that point, they are willing to spend. Once they have that cornerstone piece in office, they will spend. But when they're in rebuilding mode, they don't tend to spend that much, and they tend to value the space like crazy. Which is, I don't know. We'll see what they do with it.
I am surprised that you brought that up, that Daryl Morey didn't extend PJ Tucker and then bounce. I was convinced that's how everything was always gonna end. So here's a name that I don't think is being talked about enough because I assume they want to keep him, but I also don't know that you could look at him and be like, well, we have to keep him. But I'm sure they're getting calls on Jae'Sean Tate, who can just be a monster defensively. We don't know if he's going to be able to hit threes long term, but he can do some physical stuff with the ball in his hands too on offense. Do you think they'd be open to moving him, or is this you look at him and it's like, okay, well, he has 2 more team-controlled years at under $3.5 million total. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think they'd be open to trading him. Like again, like he is not a he. I don't think anyone on this franchise is untouchable. Even Christian Wood. I think he was
going to be my next question. I saw that they weren't willing to entertain offers on Christian Wood, and I was like, oh, are they planning on being good in one of the next 2 years? Like.
Yeah, like I think everybody has a price. It's just a matter of like what that price is. For Jae'Sean Tate, I imagine they want a first rounder back, right? Like, and probably a good first rounder. I don't think he gets moved at this deadline, but I don't think he's untouchable. No, for sure, he's definitely someone to watch over the next couple of years.
Have you enjoyed like watching him? Do you view him as someone who can contribute at a fairly high level to a really good team? And I think, look, I think you talked about this with Jonathan Fagan on your podcast, which I listened to before we did this, was that if the Rockets have all these like kind of good players, why aren't they better? And it was sort of a fair question. I know they've been banged up, but I look at this roster and I'm like, yeah, he could help, and yeah, he could help. And it's like, oh, the Rockets have lost 1 trillion games in a row. But for Jae'Sean Tate specifically, do you see him being someone who can contribute at a high level in a semi significant role to a really good team?
Perhaps off the bench. The problem is like these coaches do not like playing young players in big playoff games, right? Like, I'm not just talking about like a specific kind of coach. This extends to all coaches. They don't like playing 20-year-olds in the playoffs, right? But I do think that he can play 15 to 20 minutes at this stage of his career in a big playoff game because he's shown that kind of, I don't want to say intensity, but those type of smarts defensively, right? Like he is really intelligent for a 20-year-old. He knows where to be on the floor, and I think that kind of stuff is valuable. But I would, if I were a contender, I'd be more likely to trade a first round pick for him if he's a year or two older than as of right now. It's trading a first rounder for Jae'Sean Tate right now, even with the team controlled years, it seems like a lot. It seems like, especially because this guy was playing in Australia last year, right? Like this is he is shown that he is probably worthy of an NBA rotation spot on a good team, but I would be really, really scared about giving up a first round pick.
I've bandied about where it's like, what if it's the Nuggets? Like who really, and maybe Tate's a little bit too small for them, but he could defend really big. But like if they're giving up their first round pick, that's a team. But you talk about not wanting to play 20-year-olds in the playoffs. I don't think Mike Malone wants to play 20-year-olds ever. So that's where that sort of falls apart. But that was like a team where I thought, like, yeah, you might as well just roll the dice, or maybe not, because you do bring up some good points. You want someone who's going to help you in the playoffs, and do you trust a 20-year-old to do that for you? I honestly don't know. And him specifically, again, he's a really good a defensive monster, I would call him. But at 6'4", it's, do you trust him guarding like the biggest of the big wings?
Yeah, and at some point, Denver is going to need to find their Paul Millsap replacement, right? Like they cannot expect them to play as much as they've had him play over the past few years. But yeah, he is really impressive. You're right, and it's one of those things where like it's just I'd want to see more of a resume before I trade for him, because this could just be like a one-off type of year, even though he was really impressive in Australia. It's one of those things where I still would want to see more of a resume before I trade a first round pick for him.
Yeah, that's definitely fair, I would say. Christian Wood, then, what would it take to even get the Rockets to consider it at this point? Is it like he's in 2 first round pick range?
Yeah, 2 to 3, and I think one of those first round picks have to be really good.
Ooh.
I think, yeah, I mean, because his production is crazy, man. Like he was putting up 20 and 10s pretty regularly for the Rockets, and like that kind of player is like really valuable. And I don't think he's like the second best player on a championship team, but it's possible he could be the third best player on a championship team. Like he's that talented. Like defensively, he has a long way to go. I should say that. Like defensively, he's shown some strides.
He can really move, but it's like incoherent movement where there's like not necessarily always a rhyme or reason to what but he can cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, and specifically in an era where we're really going back to a drop back defense. Like switching it's still prevalent, right? Like the Bucks are doing a lot more switching this season, but like we're, as the NBA overall, like there seems to be a trend back to more traditional drop back defenses, and he is just not good at a drop back defense. Like he showed some moments before he got hurt, but up until that week or so of playing, like he could not seem to grasp that concept. But yeah, two first round picks is definitely what I would say. If I were Rafael Stone, that would be my asking price. For sure, that'd be like the floor, but I would want to hold on to him a little bit longer to see what he could become.
You run into the issue of too that I think the teams that should be most interested in him, I'm not sure they're not very good now, And I don't know that you can justify giving up that type of equity for Christian Wood. And then, yeah, there are teams that are good now where you could say, hey, yeah, give 2 first-round picks or a pick and a young player. But whatever picks or young players that they have, because they're so good, just might not be good. Boston could maybe use Christian Wood, or maybe they want more of a defensive backbone. But that would just be an example of like a team that, yeah, has all its draft picks, has some young guys, but like who are you actually getting from them that's going to, or what even when looking at the picks that's actually going to excite you?
It would have to be first round picks, but the problem is like their first round picks aren't that good, right? Like, so you'd have to ask for probably 3 at that point, right?
I think it would have to be like a young player. Like, can you get Naismith and 2 first round picks, something like that?
Naismith might be, yeah. If you throw in a young player like that and 2 first round picks, maybe, yeah.
I don't think he's necessarily the big man that Boston needs, but he would certainly be interesting there. What would be more likely then this season, that Christian Wood gets traded or that John Wall gets traded? Bet you weren't expecting that question when you jumped on this podcast.
Yeah, I don't think it's likely either of them gets traded. I guess Wood, because there's more of a market for him right now, right?
Yeah. What have you thought about John Wall so far this season?
He's fine. He's listen, like he's coming off a pretty significant injury, so I want to give him some slack. But like, yeah, he is still a starting point guard in this league. And I think a good starting point guard in this league. He's coming off a pretty significant injury. Defensively, he still has his moments, but this is just a tough spot for him. He's having to carry a really, really bad basketball team.
He can still move really well with the ball in his hands. I don't know what I was necessarily expecting because we haven't seen him play basketball in like 2 decades or whatever it's been in pandemic time, but he's moved a lot better than I thought. But his contract is still, from a team's perspective, is obviously not going to look that great. But yeah, look, the Rockets are going to be fascinating. I think we're both in agreement, and your opinion matters more, that this team is going to be the single busiest team at the trade deadline this year.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. Fascinating is a word. It's definitely a word, but like here's my problem. When you say fascinating, it's like, okay, so fascinating in the transaction game, I agree, but I have to watch this team every night. It's not fascinating for me at all.
I do have a feeling that the end product is not going to be fascinating to watch, even less so than it is now, because like we went over with a lot of these players, you're doing this just to move guys that are going to leave this year anyway, and so you're not even necessarily getting guys that you want to see back to on the court. You're doing this for second rounders, or if you can, for Spencer Dinwiddie's bird rights, but like that type of thing. Those are the moves that you're making, and so that could make the product there more of an adventure, I guess would be to call it. And imagine just it's like John Wall, Victor Oladipo, and I guess they still have Christian Wood, if those 3 are going to stick around, and then Gordon will be healthy again. So they won't be like totally barren. But I don't think it's going to be pretty.
No, it's not. It hasn't been pretty. Now to be fair, they've had injuries, so I want to give them some slack there. But it's been a pretty dreadful product for the most part. By the way, we haven't even talked about their pick situation. Like the reason they're tearing it down is because they pretty much have no other option but to go for the top 4 spot, right? And even just as far as last year, right? Like Cleveland and Atlanta both fell out of the top 5, of the top 4, right? And like, there's a pretty good chance that they're doing all this losing for nothing. They might end up with Miami's pick. And if you're a Rockets fan watching that on lottery day, oh my God, like I would feel so bad. Like, it would be such a punch to the gut to do, 14 games in a row they've lost right now. And there's going to be stretches like this throughout the season. Maybe not this big, but they're going to lose like 9 games in a row at another point this season, and they're doing all this losing for possibly nothing. If they don't keep that pick, it could be really, really ugly.
Yeah, because so if you finish with it's safe to assume that they're going to finish with a bottom 3 record. There's really only, as of now, Detroit and Minnesota that's going to compete with them, it looks like. So if you finish with a bottom 3 record, you have less than a 50% chance of landing in the top 4.
Yeah, like listen, if I'm Rafael Stone, like I'm trading or getting rid of anybody that helps me win basketball games because it seems like there's no way I can be good. Like if I see someone make a layup in practice, he's getting traded the next business day. If I see Steven Silas crumple up a piece of paper and throw it to the trash can, he's fired too. Anybody who's who's making any effort to be good, they're gone. They're gone.
And my math was off. You have a 52.1% chance of landing in the top 4 if you have a bottom 3 record.
For a coin toss. A coin toss. Like, that is nuts.
You have to do it, though. What is their other avenue?
No, there isn't. There isn't. It's remarkable how screwed they are.
This is the season to do it. I think, well, they own their own 2022 pick, correct? So
yeah,
they could do it the next 2 seasons. Like, there's this 2-year window for them. Oh, they own 2023 as well, don't they?
Yes, they own 2023 and 2023.
And so it's almost like you need to get the gut punches over with now, because when you start conveying picks to Oklahoma City in 2024, that's like it's just in 2024 and 2026, you can't tank in 2025. That's so far down, and it's only 1 year. So you need, like, it's now. Like, this is your window because you actually have a multiple year window to be bad and hopefully accumulate your own draft equity. Draft high and then develop a player, because in all likelihood, like, when you're looking at the Nets picks and swaps that they're getting, I would say like 2025 is the first one that I pinpoint as, hey, maybe that could be really good. I guess 2024, but you need Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Kevin Durant, 2 of them to fall off a cliff, or 2 of them to leave. And so I just don't know at that. And so so I think they're doing what's necessary, but I'm with you. If you're watching that and, you have a 52.1% chance of getting a top 4 pick and you get 5th or something, that's going to sting.
The lottery is going to be so fun. It's going to be so fun. For me, I don't think it's going to be fun for everybody, but it's going to be definitely really fun to see if they pull this off and if they can actually keep their pick. Again, two teams that had bottom 4 records last year fell out of the bottom 4. Right, the lottery has flattened to an extent to where even if you have a dreadful record, you may not keep a top 4 pick. And you just
look at the teams and the fans that are going to be enthralled by the lottery this year. You have Oklahoma City's clearly going to be watching it, maybe for their own reasons, but also because of the Houston pick. Houston, obviously, Minnesota, but then also Golden State's fan because of Minnesota.
Miami.
Very high stakes lottery this year.
Yeah, it's because you didn't expect this many teams to. You didn't a 3-team swap, like it's wow. It's grand entertainment.
Salman, thank you as always for doing this and coming on and giving me so much of your time. Once more, if you guys aren't following him on Twitter, remedy that immediately. He's at Salman Ali NBA. That's at SalmanAlinBA. He covers the Rockets for ESPN 97.5 and hosts the Red Nation Hoops podcast as well. Once more, thanks again, Salman. And I'm sure, as you know, and it might be soon, I'm going to be pestering you again.
Yeah, sure. Just don't watch the Rockets on League Pass, please. just don't do that.